Hello everybody, and welcome to our next presentation for our Fundamentals of School Administration course. In this presentation, we're going to see a transition from where we have been working primarily in Standard 2 of the ELCC standards and refreshing with some from Standard 1, and we're going to move into Standard 3. So let's take a look and see just how we have gotten to this point in our course. So the first thing you can see here is we've talked about Standard 1. Candidates are leaders who promote the success of students by facilitating the development, articulation, implementation, and stewardship of a school vision of learning supported by the school community. And so during this, we talked about your leadership styles, and we talked about vision and mission statements and how we go about getting that into the school and becoming a part of the school, ingrained in the culture, in other words. And so we looked at things like vision, mission, the goals to attain those, and so forth. Then we spent some time in the last few weeks dealing with Standard 2. Here we said candidates are leaders by promoting positive school culture, providing an effective instructional program, applying best practice to student learning, and designing comprehensive professional growth plans for staff. So here we have concentrated on curriculum, instruction, monitoring of all this, teaching and learning, professional development, and we finished with student services. Now we're going to make a transition into management. And what we mean here is what we have on the screen. So leadership does not accomplish success alone. Principals do not just accomplish success. It takes good management skills in addition to the leadership skills that we have spoken about. So all the skills that we really concentrated on dealing with Standard 2 that we talked about, those by themselves are not going to happen. It takes good management skills for that to take place. And that's what Standard 3 deals with, are these management skills. So what we're going to see is that when school improvement occurs, the following items are present. If you want quality professional development, we said that professional development is imperative. We talked about what real professional development is versus mandated training that the state requires that many schools consider quote-unquote professional development, but it's really not. But ensuring that quality professional development happens takes money and time. A good manager is able to also support the professional growth of teachers through that professional development, include teachers in the conversations that are going on in the schools, cultivate a relationship between the school and community, and manage the day-to-day tasks that happen in school. And we're going to talk about how much a principal is expected to do. So with that, let us look at Standard 3. So what we can see here, Standard 3 deals with organizational structures. And you can see I put the ELCC standard up there. And remember, this is the standard that guides school administration programs around the country and literally around the world. Standard 3 says candidates who complete the program are educational leaders who have the knowledge and ability to promote the success for all students by managing the organization, operations, and resources in a way that promotes a safe, efficient, and effective learning environment. And so here we're talking about how the school is organized. And through that organization, how relationships are ran in that organization. So we're going to talk about bureaucracy. We're going to talk about how organization structure has changed. We're going to get into a little bit of theory in this, but you need to understand how organizations work. And so we're going to talk about schools as systems and how the last 10, 20 years have changed the way we look at schools, and therefore it has changed the way that we view schools as systems, and we now view them differently than we did in the past. And so that is forcing us to change the way that we prepare leaders. So with that, let us look at our concepts of organizational structure. So depending on the school you're in, and keep in mind the majority of schools in which I worked were small rural schools. And so a lot of this might be one person, but I want to give you some key things here, especially those of you who are in urban settings. So your organization needs to evolve around these structures, and understanding the basic idea of these structures is going to help you. Obviously, job specialization. We have our teachers organized, and then within those subcategories, we actually have, as you know, organized by discipline and so forth like that. That's simple to see. Also under job specialization are your maintenance people, your custodial staff, your administrative assistance staff, your paras, your cafeteria workers. All of these people have their job specializations. And one of the things I found in working with schools is that there tends to be a lack of clarification in a lot of job descriptions. So that's one of the things I would encourage you to do is make sure that your job descriptions match how you see the roles of each of the people in your building playing out. Departmentalization, again, this helps things to become more efficient, and it leads into that third bullet, delegation. So obviously as you departmentalize and you're spreading your work through the maintenance aspect, the custodial, the cafeteria, or whatever it is, as work flows up, you're able to delegate some authority and responsibility to people in those departments to carry out what you want to happen in that department. And we're going to see in a minute, we're going to look at a chart that shows that as you move up the chain of command, and obviously the principal is the first really big step on that leadership ladder up to, in the K-12 system, obviously a superintendent. But as you move up, your work is going to be consumed by more conceptual work as opposed to the technical work. And that will happen whether you want it to or not. And so what you will learn is that as a principal, you become a delegator, and you work with your staff and your faculty, and you start delegating authority to people in those departments, or however you design the departments, the unit, whatever you want to call it. But that's what we're talking about there. So when you have a custodial staff, you typically are going to have a head custodian. When you have a cafeteria staff, you're going to have a head cafeteria worker, and so on. And what these people are going to do by departmentalization, delegation, is that you're able to work with the leader, and then that information can flow out from there. Now that doesn't mean that it's a top-down management approach, and we're definitely going to talk about that in just a minute. But that saves you the time of dealing with all the technical issues of whatever, of the day-to-day activities of running a school, so that you can spend your resources, and by that I really mean time and energy, on the things that need to be done as a building leader. Decentralization somewhat goes hand in hand with that delegation. The more you're able to delegate authority to the people around you and give them the responsibility for making decisions that lead to the fulfillment of your vision, then the more decentralized the decision process becomes. It becomes more collaborative in many ways. And then finally, span of management. This is another organizational structure that you need to be aware of and how it works in your system. And span of management I've seen this called span of control. And what this means is the number of people who report to you. And typically what we like to see is this number around 6 to 12 people. We typically don't like it to go over 12 people. Now, obviously, if you are the head principal and you have no assistants, then that means all the teachers report to you. And when I say report, I mean who evaluates the person. So keep that in mind, okay, as you work through your system. And unfortunately, it's not uncommon to see these numbers become extremely high, especially if you're in a building working in a district that says you need 600 students before we'll consider an assistant principal, and you're right at 590 or so. Those types of situations, you automatically have 25 to 30 teachers reporting to you and everybody else in the building. So that span of control can easily eat up all your energy and time. Again, the resources, time and energy, that's what I'm talking about here. So you can see why all these other organizational structures are important and need to be in place to make an effective organization. So we've kind of answered the question, what do each of these terms mean and how they help explain the concept of an organizational structure? And what I've done is kind of walked you through how you can apply these into education, okay? And that's what this question is asking here. These terms all support efficiency in a system. They allow processes to happen at a faster, more efficient manner. Can we apply this to education? And the answer is yes. You can apply it to education. It takes a very collaborative approach to education, but you can apply it. And in turn, it makes education more efficient in the terms of you and the use of your time and energy. So getting into a little bit of theory here, I want you to think of schools as an open system, okay? And so the opposite of that would be a closed system. So an open system here, we mean that the school operates and interacts with the environment around it. So what do we mean by the environment around it? So we take the human, the financial, the physical, and the information resources around the school. So this completely involves the community and in theory could involve the community as a whole. So this is what we mean when we say an open system. Our inputs are constantly changing. And while in general we think of our inputs as students, these other things, physical, tangible items, financial responsibilities, and general information, all of these things are inputs that come into the system, and they're not set. They are all acted upon by the environment, and so everything comes in differently. This is one of the things that obviously distinguishes schools from business, and why I don't believe that you can treat schools like a business is because our inputs are all different. Because we do operate as a very open system, and whatever the input may be, the environment has had an impact on that input, and so nothing is constant when it comes to our inputs, okay? That's what I mean when I say an open system. The transformation process then within this open system, and there are three pieces to this system. The transformation process is what the principal does. Combines and coordinates the resources to attain the goals. So this is why we started with Standard 1. What's the vision and mission of the school? And that's why it's important for the principal to determine what the vision and mission is, because then we're going to take Standard 2 and we're going to take the curriculum and we're going to take the teaching and learning and support it with student services and professional development. And all of that the principal is going to combine and coordinate and then take the resources found in Standard 3, and later on, as we'll see, those things that are in Standard 4, 5, and 6. And we're going to put all those things together, and the principal is going to be in charge of this transformation process so that the inputs that we get, primarily students, but also these other inputs, will ultimately go through this transformation process that is designed by the principal and become this output, the goal that the principal has set. Prepare and educate student staff to the community satisfaction. Okay, and here we mean community in a broader sense. And then finally, that's really the 3 parts. But there's a 4th part that is continuously iterative along this, and that's feedback. Okay, and we'll really see this feedback come in Standard 4 when we look at Standard 4. But feedback in the sense of students, parents, staff, and community reaction to those outputs, to those students, are the students that are going through the transformational process that the school has created, led by the principal, meeting the goals that have been established by the principal in the community of stakeholders. That feedback is constantly coming through each of those. So to put it in a visual, then we can see that this transformational process deals with planning, organizing, leading, and monitoring. And once we've made it through that loop the first time, then we can change planning to adjusting and planning, organizing, leading, monitoring, adjusting, and planning. And it's a continuous loop that goes on and on and on. Okay? So in this process, then, planning tells the principals what to do, and organizing tells them how they're going to do it. Leading tells principals why the staff members should want to do it. Okay? So again, what we're saying here is this planning and then ultimately adjusting as we go through this cycle in a continuous improvement model, and we're going to hit on that in just a minute. This is the principal telling, making the plans of what the vision and mission of the school is. The organization is the principal working collaboratively with the community of stakeholders, explaining how they're going to fulfill the plan. And then the leading is the principals convincing the community of stakeholders on why it's important to complete the plan and how we're going to continue to do it. And then the monitoring is that constant check on the plan, and then we reinitiate the cycle. So I said earlier that when we're talking about resources with the principal, we're talking about time and energy. Okay, principals have an extremely heavy workload. So what I want you to see here is connecting all these things that we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes or so. All that delegation of authority, all the roles that the principal has to play, all the activities that go on, the importance of an organizational structure that's effective is the principal cannot do this on his or her own. And here's why. I think that this information is probably fairly old. It's probably increased would be my guess. An elementary principal typically works 51 hours per week. HPW is hours per week. A high school principal typically works 53 hours per week. Principals process on average about 20 pieces of mail a day. And any free time during your day is very scarce and often filled with postponed activities that you just didn't get to before. Okay, so you can imagine then we're looking at a work day, 51 to 53 hours a week, 9 to 11 hours a day on average. A lot of this is obviously filled with after-school activities. We're staying after school and doing paperwork and stuff. It's a very intense position. Principals are rewarded somewhat for this, obviously with a bump in pay, but with that comes this greater demand. Principals engage, a fairly recent study, in at least 149 different activities per day, half of which took less than 5 minutes. These are decision-making activities that happen throughout the day. Okay, most activities a principal deals with are going to be very short and solving dilemmas. Okay, and the problem is when large dilemmas arise that take a lot of the principal's time. That does not mean that the other activities cease to exist. It just means that they get put on the back burner. So keep in mind, it's long days, and this is why, because you have so much to do in a day. Most of the communication that is done, or most of the work that is done with principals, is done through oral communication, whether it's through students, through staff, through faculty, or through parents or the administration. Most of it is done through oral communication. Okay, so let's take a look. Earlier I mentioned that as you become a principal, your responsibility tends to shift from technical expertise to where you're applying your practice to more of a conceptual idea. So let's talk about what we mean by that, because as we see here, like I said, most of the communication that you do is oral communication, and most of the things that you deal with on a daily basis are very short activities that are communicated orally. So when I'm talking about conceptual skills, this is what I mean here. Your mental ability to acquire, analyze, and interpret information. It is key that you become, and you will develop this as you work through your principalship, that you develop critical thinking skills. Okay, the ability to analyze and interpret multiple sources of information that are coming to you. And so you're going to apply these conceptual skills at a much more intense and higher rate than you have in the past once you become a principal. Next to conceptual skills, we have human skills. Your ability to motivate, facilitate, coordinate, lead, communicate, manage conflict, and get along with others. And then finally, the skill that you've relied upon most as a teacher is going to become the least skill that you rely upon as a principal. And these are your technical skills, your ability to use your knowledge, methods, and techniques of a specific discipline. So let's take a look at a chart here just to give you an idea. And you can see at the bottom of this chart we have department heads. And then we have principals, and then we have superintendents at the top. And you can imagine if we were to add a layer at the bottom and put classroom teachers, that these rays in the chart would continue at this angle, so that a teacher is primarily working and spending most of their time with technical skills, and obviously that's what we would want a teacher to do. Less with human and much less on the conceptual side. But as we move up in leadership from a department head to a principal and ultimately to a superintendent, we see you relying less on that technical side of your skills and more on that conceptual side. So let's take a look one more time what we mean. That conceptual side is your ability to analyze and interpret information and make decisions based upon that analysis and interpretation. And acquiring. You have to get the correct information in order to solve the correct problem. So again, it's important that you understand that your role is changing as you become a principal. So what makes an effective principal then? In a study of 20 effective and 21 ineffective principals, the ineffective principals had the following characteristics. Okay, So notice what we're looking at here. This is somewhat negative compared to what we usually look at in studies. These are the negative characteristics that were found to be with ineffective principals. Number one, they were insensitive to others, abrasive, intimidating, and bullying. I'm not going to get into politics here, so we will leave that one out of it. Number two, they were cold, aloof, and arrogant. Number three, there was a betrayal of trust, a failure to accomplish the stated intention. Do not make a promise or a statement to someone that you cannot fulfill. Otherwise, that betrayal of trust will set in. Okay? Even if it's an innocent statement, it will set in. Overly ambitious, thinking of the next job, playing politics. Overmanaging, unable to delegate or build a team. And what happens when you're unable to delegate authority, and we talked about delegation earlier as part of an organizational structure piece. When you're unable to delegate, what happens is you become a tyrant, and people will jump ship quickly and lose faith in you. These start falling together. You're viewed as arrogant, and trust is lost, and you become a tyrant. And you are unable to staff effectively. People don't want to work for you. You are unable to plan and organize your work, to adapt to a superior with a different work ethic or work style becomes difficult. You're unable to adjust to new and changing conditions. And finally, you're over-dependent on an advocate or a mentor. And you're constantly asking somebody what to do instead of developing your own agenda. So these are the things that an ineffective principal displays. So how do you overcome these things? Effective versus successful administrators. And we all know these, okay? An effective principal is how well a principal was evaluated by his or her subordinates. Most time on task related communications, human resource management. A successful principal, somebody who just moves up the ranks quickly, little time on this human resource management, good at networking, politically savvy. Okay. My pleading with you is that you aim to be that effective principal. I think that as school leaders become more accountable for the activities within schools, these quote-unquote successful principals, these principals who are rapidly rise through promotions, are going to be less and less because it's accountability is forcing us to look at results, and we want to look at effectiveness. Okay, and so the studies show that an effective principal is someone who is rated well by their subordinates. They have time on task related communication, and they're good at dealing with people, that human resource management piece. So let's talk about bureaucracy for just a second. The module is going to contain some stuff on bureaucracy, and schools have really changed in this sense. Okay, a bureaucracy is the pattern of organization that dictates relationships. Okay, and you can see here some characteristics of bureaucracy. Bureaucracy has really come into play in the early 20th century. Okay, and this is a business model that we're thinking of now, with specialization of labor, division and labor specialization, and it's realized that in the 18th or the 19th century, you could make a high quality piece of furniture, and one man could do it, or one woman. I guess we could say one woman could do it, but we typically think of an artisan in the 19th century as a man working in his barn creating a piece of furniture. But as the Industrial Revolution happened, there was a change in American history, and we saw a rise in labor, and we saw a rise in bureaucracies, because what happened is business leaders realized that if one man can make this piece of furniture that's worth so many dollars, then what we could do is divide up the labor, and by doing that, we could mass produce this stuff, and it would be less, but we could get, the price would be less, but we would sell so many that it wouldn't matter, because we would make money. Okay? This division of labor, all this is going to start falling into place. The division of labor then has with it reliance upon rules and procedures. This is how this step is done. Everybody involved in this step does it this way. And then the next step, it goes from there and there. Emphasis on a hierarchy of authority. You're the employee. You report to your manager, who reports to a division manager, who reports to a vice president or somebody. And that's how it works, okay? Lifelong careers. When people at the turn of the 20th century, in the early 1900s, especially after the Great Depression and we came out of World War II, people got into jobs, and there was definitely by this time the idea of this bureaucracy had set in. And lifelong careers were established in business. Okay, it was very impersonal. This is what you did, and you did it for your life. And if you were promoted, that's fine. If not, that's fine. Okay, but all this set in. This also moved into education. Okay, but education is not the same as a business. And I said that earlier, and I'll say that again, and I'll continue to say that education is not the same as a business. So if that's the case, then what are the alternatives? And some of the alternatives here we can see, and we're going to talk about total quality management with Deming in the module in a little bit here. But let's start with System 4 design. And in System 4 design, really think of this as a continuum. And on one end of the continuum is what is called System 1. System 1 is very bureaucratic, and on the other end of the continuum then is System 4. And in System 4 we see a system that is very humanistic, it's interactive, it's group-oriented, very collaborative. This is where we're trying to move classrooms and school systems as a whole. Some are there, many are still struggling. So using it as a principle, need to understand that you need to get to that level of bureaucracy, that you are at a very collaborative. Site-based management, on the other hand, this is a common thing that we see in schools, in large districts. And this is a struggle, because in site-based management the question is, where does the main authority lie? And the problem with site-based management are there are certain things that the central office needs to have control of, and there are certain things that sites can have control of. This is not the role where we are going to talk about that, but just know that site-based management deals with the autonomy a principal has in his or her building, and it can get to the point where too much autonomy causes fragments within the system, especially within a large system. Transformational leadership represents really the transcendence of self by the leader and those led. And what transformational leadership does is the leader accomplishes three things here. The transformational leader really get stakeholders to buy into the vision. They raise the concept of team up so that self-interest is diminished, and they get other personnel in the organization to start aiming toward self-actualization in the sense of becoming a member of the team and leading the institution to the goals the institution has set. Okay, and so transformational leadership deals with disregarding self for the betterment of the team. Synergistic leadership also works much in that same vein, but concentrates on diversity and leadership styles in the sense of attitudes and belief toward diversity and gender. It's much more encompassing in that sense. Total quality management. This is Edward Deming, and this is really what has driven a lot of the work that I've done when working with schools. And what Deming says is the primary task of leadership is to narrow the amount of variation within the system, bringing everyone toward the goal of learning for all. And remember what I said when I said that schools are open systems. Okay, I said that because inputs are all impacted by their environment, so no input is the same. It's a system in the other sense that everything works in a rational manner in the system. And if there's no direction, then the parts of the system are going to act in the most rational way that those individual parts believe. And here I'm talking about teachers, staff, students, principals, whatever the role may be. And what that does is it adds variation to the system. And if you're a good leader, according to Deming, once you get everybody on the same path, then what you're going to do is reduce that amount of variation in the system. And this is called, quote, total quality management, okay? And in my mind, this is the best structure that theory has that explains how effective schools work. For that reason, you've been doing things like, what are the expectations for professional development in your school, okay? If those expectations are not there, then what's going to happen is that variations or interpretations will set in, and people will have different meanings on that. And so total quality management would say that a good leader is going to narrow that by establishing expectations up front. So here's a little bit about what I was saying about System 4 design, where it's a continuum of organization. And I'm not going to go through all this. You'll get the idea real quickly. Leadership on the System 1 side is top-down. There's no trust. There's no motivation. Communication flows downhill. Subordinates have little interaction with those above them. Whereas on the System 4 side, leadership, subordinates feel free to communicate. There's a full range of motivation. So a combination of this and some of these others really is what's going to lead to effective schools. Here, the transformational leadership, as I said, it's a transcendence of self-interest by both the leader and those led. It's a very collaborative culture. It fosters teacher development, improved group and problem solving. Synergistic leadership is that modernist approach to leadership. It incorporates a female voice and diversity into the approach of leadership. It incorporates attitudes, beliefs, not beliefs, and values, leadership, behavior, external forces, and organizational structure. And then the total quality management based on W. Edward Deming, the continuous improvement model. Assumption is that people want to do their best, and that it is the leader's job to enable them to do so by constantly improving the system in which they work. And finally, the last thing we're going to look at here, there are more pieces to total quality management that we'll see in the module, but the last thing I want to look at is 10 concepts helpful in restructuring the content of schooling. Heterogeneous grouping. Okay. Mix it up. Cooperative learning. High expectations for all. Responsiveness to student diversity. Emphasis on active learning. An essential curriculum. Authentic assessments. Technology as a tool. Time as a resource. And a diverse pedagogy. Think about these 10 things. And I would ask you to rate them, how they are in your system, and explain why you rated them. That would be a good assignment that we should have done. But we're not going to do that. But I want you to think about these things and think of how you as a principal can add these things into the restructurement of your school.